The prisoner and the enemy. Ethan Carter woke up to darkness. His head throbbed, and his body ached as he tried to move. Cold metal cuffs dug into his wrists, keeping him chained to the wall. His vision was blurry, but he could see the dim glow of strange blue lights running along the ceiling. The air smelled of metal and something else, something alien. He was no longer on Earth. His last memory was the battle over Jupiter's moon, Europa. Earth's forces had been fighting the Zokari, a reptilian alien race that wanted to conquer human territory. Ethan had been in his fighter ship, dodging plasma fire, when suddenly, his controls failed. A bright energy beam had swallowed his ship whole. Then, nothing. Now he was here, a prisoner. A door slid open with a soft hiss. Ethan tensed as a figure stepped into the room. It was tall, almost 7 feet, covered in sleek black armor. Its skin was dark blue, almost violet, with sharp ridges running along the sides of its face. Its eyes were golden and slitted like a serpent's. A Zokari warrior. But this one was different. The armor had intricate silver markings, showing high rank. A long black cape flowed behind them. This was no ordinary soldier. This was a commander. The alien stepped closer and tilted its head slightly, studying him. Then, in a voice both cold and calm, it spoke. "You are awake." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "No thanks to you." His throat was dry, and his voice was rough, but he forced himself to sound strong. He would not show weakness. The alien did not react. Instead, it stepped to a panel on the wall and pressed a glowing button. The cuffs around Ethan's wrists unlocked with a metallic click. He rubbed his sore wrists, keeping his eyes locked on the enemy. "What do you want from me?" Ethan demanded. The alien remained silent for a moment. Then it took off its helmet. Ethan's breath caught. The face beneath the helmet was not what he expected. Sharp features, high cheekbones, smooth blue skin with faint silver markings near the temples. The eyes, though cold, held something he had never seen in a Zokari before. Calculated patience. She was a woman. "My name is Commander Xyra," she said, her voice still emotionless. "And you are Ethan Carter, pilot of the Earth Fleet. Your people call you a war hero." Ethan let out a short laugh. "That depends on who you ask." Xyra did not smile. Zokari never smiled. She simply stared at him, as if deciding something. Then, without a word, she reached into her armor and pulled out a small container. She placed it on the floor in front of him. Food. Ethan frowned. Was this a trick? Poison? An experiment? He looked at her, waiting for an answer. "You need to eat," she said. "Your body is weak." Ethan clenched his jaw. "I'd rather starve than take charity from an enemy." Xyra's expression did not change. "Your people will not come for you." That made his blood go cold. He wanted to argue, to say that Earth's forces would never leave him behind. But deep down, he knew the truth. The war was brutal. A single lost pilot meant nothing compared to the thousands still fighting. If he was here, inside an enemy warship, then Earth's commanders had already assumed he was dead. He was alone. Xyra stepped closer, her golden eyes locked onto his. "You think I am offering you kindness." She leaned slightly forward. "I am not." Ethan kept his face unreadable, but inside, unease grew. "If you were any other human, you would be dead by now." Xyra continued. "But I did not bring you here to kill you." "Then why am I here?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice steady. Xyra hesitated, and for the first time, her cold mask seemed to crack. "You are my last hope," she said. Ethan stared at her, stunned. A Zokari calling a human her last hope. That made no sense. She turned away and walked to the door. Before stepping out, she said one last thing. "Rest while you can, Ethan Carter. Soon, you will understand why you are here." The door slid shut behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the dim, silent room. His mind raced. A Zokari commander had captured him. She was feeding him. She claimed he was her last hope. Nothing about this made sense. One thing was clear: whatever was coming next was bigger than just a war. And somehow, he was at the center of it. The desperate offer. Ethan Carter sat on the cold metal floor of his cell, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of him. His stomach growled, but his pride wouldn't let him give in so easily. He was a prisoner, taken from a war he was still willing to fight. Accepting food from the enemy felt like surrender. Yet, his mind kept replaying those strange words from his captor. "You are my last hope." What did she mean? Why would a high-ranking Zokari commander say such a thing to a human? The Zokari were ruthless conquerors. To them, humans were nothing more than an obstacle, another race to be subdued. And yet, she had freed his hands, offered him food, and left him unharmed. Something was wrong. The door to his cell hissed open again, breaking his thoughts. Commander Xaira stepped inside, but this time, she wasn't alone. Two heavily armed Zokari guards flanked her, their glowing rifles aimed at Ethan's chest. Their golden eyes held no warmth, only cold efficiency. "Come with me." Iris. Ethan remained seated. "And if I refuse?" One of the guards stepped forward, gripping a long energy baton. A soft hum filled the air as the weapon powered up. Xaira tilted her head slightly. "I would prefer you walk, but if you make it difficult." She glanced at the baton. "They will carry you." Ethan clenched his fists. He knew when he was outmatched. With a sigh, he pushed himself up and followed her out of the cell. The hallway outside was vast and dimly lit, its walls lined with pulsating blue lights. The technology here was sleek, almost organic, as if the ship itself was alive. Other Zokari soldiers passed by, barely sparing him a glance. It was unsettling. Back on Earth, if a Zokari prisoner walked through a human military base, everyone would be watching, whispering, maybe even spitting at them. But here, no one cared. They didn't see him as a threat. Xaira led him through a series of corridors until they reached a large chamber. The doors slid open, revealing a circular room with a tall, transparent dome. Through it, Ethan could see the vast darkness of space, stars glimmering in the distance. Below them, a massive red planet loomed, its surface scarred with craters and storms. This wasn't Earth. "Sit," Xaira commanded, motioning to a metallic chair in the center of the room. Ethan hesitated but sat down. The guards took their positions by the door, weapons still raised. Xaira remained standing, arms crossed. "Do you know where you are?" she asked. Ethan looked at the red planet outside. "Not Earth, that's for sure. You are on the Zokari flagship Vexus, orbiting Ralvik 4. He had heard the name before. Ralvik 4, one of the Zokari's main colonies, a fortress world. No human had ever set foot here and lived. Ethan leaned back. "Let me guess. You didn't bring me here for a friendly chat." Xaira exhaled slowly, as if deciding how much to tell him. Then she spoke. "The Zokari Empire is not as strong as your people believe," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You could have fooled me. Your ships, your soldiers. You seem pretty strong from where I'm sitting." Xaira's eyes narrowed. "It is a lie," she said. "Our empire is dying." Ethan studied her. There was no hesitation in her voice, no deception in her expression. She meant it. "What do you mean, dying?" he asked. Xaira walked over to the dome, staring out at the stars. "Our people have ruled for centuries. We have conquered planets, crushed rebellions, expanded our territory beyond the limits of our ancestors." She turned back to him. "But there is one enemy we cannot defeat: time." Ethan frowned. "Our biology is failing," she continued. "Every generation, our birth rate declines. Our people are strong, but we are few. Within a century, there will not be enough Zokari to sustain the empire." Ethan stared at her, trying to process the information. The ruthless warriors who had burned human colonies to the ground were dying out. "And what does this have to do with me?" he asked. Zara stepped closer, her golden eyes unreadable. "The council has ordered me to take a mate." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me?" "As one of the highest-ranking commanders, I must prove loyalty to my people. A mate strengthens my status, ensures my leadership." She paused. "But I have no mate." Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "Sounds like a personal problem." Zara ignored his sarcasm. "I need a strong partner, one with tactical skill, one who understands war." The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "You're joking." "I do not joke." Ethan ran a hand down his face. "You want me to marry you. Not in the way humans do." Iris. Zokari bonding is different. It is a public display of unity. A warrior's strength is measured not only by battle, but by the bond they share. And if you don't bond with someone, Zira's jaw tightened. "I will be removed from command. My rival, General Vekros, will take my place. He believes in total war. If he gains power, your planet will be the first to fall." Ethan exhaled. He didn't trust her, not for a second. But if she was telling the truth, if this Vekros took control, Earth could be wiped out. "And if I agree?" Ethan asked. Zira's gaze did not waver. "Then you live. You will not be treated as a prisoner. You will have status, protection, and most importantly," she hesitated, then said, "you may have the power to stop this war." Ethan leaned back, shaking his head. "This is insane." "It is survival," Zira corrected. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Ethan let out a slow breath and met her gaze. "If I say no?" Zira didn't answer. She didn't have to. The guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Ethan sighed. "Looks like I don't have a choice." Zira nodded. "Then it is decided." The doors slid open, and the guards stepped aside. "In 3 days, we will perform the bonding ritual." She turned to leave but stopped at the doorway. "Prepare yourself, human. From this moment forward, you are no longer my prisoner." Her golden eyes locked onto his. "You are my mate." The doors shut, leaving Ethan with one horrifying thought. How the hell did he get himself into this? Forced to say, "I do." Ethan Carter paced inside the chamber that had been assigned to him. It was larger than his prison cell, with smooth metallic walls and a single viewing window overlooking the endless void of space. A bed, a table, and some alien-looking furniture filled the space, but it still felt like a cage. 3 days. That's how long he had been here since Zira had made her impossible offer. No, not an offer, a demand. Marry her, bond with her, become her mate. Ethan scoffed, rubbing his face in frustration. This had to be some kind of nightmare. A human pilot, forced into an alien marriage just to prevent a war. It sounded like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. And yet, it was real. His door slid open without warning. Ethan turned, expecting guards, but instead, it was Kyra. She was dressed differently this time. Her black armor replaced with a dark crimson ceremonial robe, lined with silver patterns. Her hair, usually tied back, was now braided in intricate loops. She looked regal, powerful, and completely unreadable. "It is time," she said, her voice calm as ever. Ethan crossed his arms. "You say that like I have a choice." Zira's gaze didn't waver. "You made your choice when you agreed." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Right. I agreed to marry my captor, who happens to be the commander of the army trying to destroy my people." Zira stepped closer. "This bond does not make you my servant," she said. "It gives you power. Do not waste it." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Power? You think dressing me up and parading me in front of your people makes me powerful? I'm just a prisoner with a new title." Syra's golden eyes darkened. You do not understand the weight of this ritual, human. If I fail today, Vecros will take my place. Your world will burn. Ethan sighed. He knew she was right, but that didn't make this any easier. Before he could argue further, 2 Zokari guards entered, holding out something in their hands. A dark, armored suit, clearly meant for him. Syra nodded toward it. Put it on. Ethan hesitated. What happens if I refuse? Syra didn't answer. She didn't have to. With a sigh, he grabbed the suit and stepped behind a dividing wall. The material was sleek, surprisingly lightweight but sturdy. When he finished, he stepped out, and Syra gave him an approving look. Now, she said, we begin. The ceremony. Ethan expected something grand, like an enormous hall filled with thousands of spectators. But what he walked into was something else entirely. The chamber was massive, circular, with high ceilings and glowing blue symbols carved into the walls. A large, raised platform stood in the center, and at its heart, a massive ring of energy pulsed like a living heartbeat. Hundreds of Zokari stood in silence, their reptilian eyes fixed on him as he entered with Syra. Most of them were dressed in dark robes, but a few wore military armor, their hands resting on weapons. Among them, Ethan spotted one figure standing apart, General Vecros. The Zokari warrior was taller than Syra, broader, his black armor lined with gold. His piercing gaze followed Ethan's every move, as if calculating how long it would take to kill him. Ethan swallowed hard. Syra led him onto the platform, where an elder Zokari, his skin a faded silver, his eyes nearly white, stood waiting. The ceremony of unity begins, the elder announced, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. Ethan shifted uneasily. Syra turned to him and spoke in a voice only he could hear. Zokari bonding is different from human marriage, she explained. It is not words. It is not a contract. It is a test. Ethan frowned. Test. Before she could answer, the elder gestured toward the ring of pulsing energy. You must prove your bond, the elder said. Step forward. Ethan hesitated, looking at Syra. What the hell does that mean? She exhaled. Zokari warriors do not form bonds with weakness, she said. The ritual will test if we are worthy to stand together. Ethan's stomach tightened. He had no idea what that meant, but the look on Syra's face told him that failure wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, he stepped toward the energy ring. As soon as his foot crossed the boundary, pain shot through his body. He gasped, stumbling as something invisible wrapped around him. His muscles locked, his chest tightened. It felt like an electric current was running through his veins. Syra stepped in beside him, unfazed. Do not resist, she said through clenched teeth. Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay upright. The energy pulsed harder, growing hotter. It was testing him, probing his mind, his body. He saw flashes of memories, his past battles, his victories, his failures. The moment his ship was captured. The moment he stood in that cell, listening to Syra's impossible proposal. Then he saw her. Her memories. A young Syra, standing before a group of warriors, smaller, weaker, fighting against larger opponents. Failing. Bleeding. Rising again. A lifetime of war. A lifetime of proving herself. A lifetime of loneliness. Ethan gasped as the vision faded. The energy ring dimmed, and suddenly, the pain was gone. He dropped to one knee, panting. Syra stood beside him, silent. The elder studied them both, then spoke. The bond is formed. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some seemed surprised. Others, displeased. Vecros narrowed his eyes. Ethan slowly stood. His body still ached, but something felt different. Something inside him had changed. The elder turned to the crowd. By ancient law, they are bound, he declared. Commander Syra and Ethan Carter are now one. Ethan barely had time to process the words before Syra turned to him and whispered, "You are no longer a prisoner, Ethan Carter." Her golden eyes locked onto his. "You are my mate." Aftermath. Ethan sat in silence in his new quarters, still processing everything. The test, the bond, the energy. He could still feel something inside him, like a presence, something faint but undeniable. It wasn't just for show. Something had truly changed between them. And as he stared out into the vastness of space, one thought lingered in his mind. What the hell had he just agreed to? The enemy's secret. Ethan Carter sat on the edge of the metal bed in his new quarters, his fingers pressed against his temples. His head was pounding, not from exhaustion or stress, but from something else, something deeper. The bonding ceremony had done something to him. He could still feel it, the strange, lingering sensation in the back of his mind. It was like a whisper, a faint presence that wasn't his own. It wasn't painful, it wasn't intrusive, but it was there. And he knew exactly who it belonged to. Commander Syra. The moment they had stepped into that energy field, something had connected them. He didn't know how or why, but it wasn't just a ritual. It was real. A part of him was now linked to her. He exhaled sharply, standing up. This is insane. The door to his quarters slid open. Syra stepped inside, her usual cold expression in place. She had changed back into her military armor, black and silver, with the sharp insignia of her rank displayed on the chest. She regarded him for a moment. "You are adjusting." Ethan scoffed. "Is that what you call it?" "Because I call it losing my damn mind." Syra stepped closer. "You are feeling the bond," she said simply. "It is normal." "Normal?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I can feel you, Syra. Your presence, in my head. What the hell did you do to me?" Syra's expression didn't change. "The bond is not one-sided," she said. "I can feel you as well." That made Ethan pause. She could feel him too. For the first time, the realization made his anger waver. "What exactly does that mean?" he asked carefully. Syra studied him, then sighed. "You and I are linked now. Not just by title, not just by words. The bond is a mental and physical connection between warriors." Ethan crossed his arms. "So you can read my thoughts now." "No, not thoughts. Emotions. Presence. The stronger the bond, the more we will sense each other." Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't like the idea of an alien war commander being able to sense him. And yet he wasn't sure if it was something he could fight. Something about it felt unbreakable. He shook his head. "Why me?" Syra finally looked away. "Because I had no other choice." That answer didn't satisfy him. Ethan stepped forward. "Tell me the truth." She hesitated, just for a moment. Then she spoke. "The truth about the Zokari. Our people are dying," Syra said, her voice quieter than before. Ethan frowned. "I know. You told me that already." Syra shook her head. "No, I told you part of the truth." She turned toward the window, staring out at the stars. "For centuries, the Zokari have been known as warriors, conquerors, an empire that takes what it wants," she said. "But the truth is, we are flawed." Ethan waited. "Our biology is failing us." Ira continued. "The Council does not want the truth to spread. But the reality is undeniable. Our people have become weaker. Each new generation is smaller than the last. Our lifespan, once powerful, has begun to shorten." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "And this has to do with me." "How?" Syra finally turned back to face him. "Our species cannot reproduce with its own kind anymore." Ethan blinked. "What?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "The Zokari cannot sustain themselves. There have been no successful births in over a decade. We are a dying race." Ethan felt his stomach drop. He had expected secrets. Expected betrayal. But this. You're saying your entire species is infertile. Thyra nodded. Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. That's impossible. No, it is reality. Ethan shook his head, trying to process. And the council? They don't want people to know. Thyra's expression darkened. If the truth is revealed, the Empire will collapse. Vecros and his supporters want war to hide the truth. If we keep fighting, no one will question why our numbers are dwindling. Ethan ran a hand down his face. This is insane. You're telling me the war isn't about territory or survival. It's just to stall the inevitable. Yes. Silence fell between them. Ethan exhaled. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had always seen the Zokari as ruthless enemies, warriors who would fight until the last soldier fell. But now he saw the truth. They were desperate. And Thyra, she was fighting against the tide, trying to save her people in the only way she knew how, by finding another solution, by bonding with him. Ethan let out a slow breath. That's why you needed a mate. Thyra nodded. It is the only way to challenge the system. Ethan stared at her, something shifting in his mind. She wasn't just using him. She was risking everything by choosing him. She could have taken another Zokari mate, one who would secure her place in the military, even if it was a lie. But instead, she had chosen him, a human, an enemy. And now, they were bonded. For better or worse, the silent war. Ethan sat down heavily, still trying to wrap his head around it. So what happens now? He asked. Thyra's expression turned serious. Now, we prove our bond to the council. Ethan frowned. Didn't we already do that with the whole energy test thing? Thyra's golden eyes glinted. That was only the beginning. Ethan swallowed hard. Let me guess. The next test isn't so easy. Thyra's lips pressed into a thin line. General Vecros has challenged our bond. He does not believe it is real. Ethan clenched his fists. Of course he doesn't. If we fail, Thyra continued, he will have the right to challenge me in combat. Ethan stiffened. And if you lose? Thyra's voice was like steel. Then I die. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. This wasn't just a political game anymore. This was war. And now, he wasn't just a prisoner. He was her only hope. The betrayal within. Ethan Carter sat in silence, his hands curled into fists as he stared at the metal table in front of him. His mind was spinning. The walls of his new quarters, bigger than his previous cell, but still feeling like a prison, seemed to close in around him. The Zokari were dying. The war was a lie, and he had just been forced into an alliance with the only person standing between Earth and total annihilation. Thyra. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. The bond between them, it was still there, a constant presence in the back of his mind. He didn't know if she could sense his frustration, but at this point, he didn't care. The door slid open, and Sarah entered, her movements precise, her expression unreadable. She wore her military armor again, her long black cape flowing behind her. The challenge has been accepted, she said without preamble. Ethan looked up. Challenge. Vecros has formally questioned our bond, she said. The council has agreed to a public trial. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Trial. Sarah stepped closer. We must prove that our bond is real. Ethan scoffed. And how the hell are we supposed to do that? You expect me to start acting like some loving husband? Thyra's golden eyes locked onto his. No, she said. I expect you to survive. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What does that mean? Thyra hesitated, something she rarely did. Then she spoke. The Zokari do not trust words, she said. They trust strength. If our bond is real, we must prove it in the arena. Ethan stared at her. Arena. Thyra nodded. Vecros has invoked the right of dominion. A public challenge. You and I must fight as one. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Fight. She crossed her arms. A test of unity. If we fail, I lose my command. Vecros takes my place. And you. She paused. You will not leave this ship alive. Ethan swallowed hard. Great, he muttered. A honeymoon fight to the death. Just what I always wanted. The arena of blood. The chamber was enormous. Rows upon rows of Zokari warriors lined the circular stands, their golden eyes glowing in the dim light. The arena itself was made of sleek metal, the floor covered in faintly glowing symbols. A dome of transparent energy surrounded it, humming with power. And at the far end, waiting with his massive arms crossed, stood General Vecros. He was taller than Ethan, broader, his scaled armor gleaming under the lights. His eyes burned with malice, his thick claws tapping impatiently against his belt. Zyra stood beside Ethan, calm as ever. You have fought before, she said. Ethan scoffed. Yeah, in a fighter ship, with missiles and lasers, not with my bare hands against an alien giant. Zyra tilted her head. Then you must learn quickly. Before Ethan could respond, the deep voice of the Elder Zokari echoed through the arena. The bond must be tested, the Elder declared. If it is real, they will fight together. If it is false, they will fall. A deafening cheer erupted from the crowd. Ethan exhaled. This is insane. The floor beneath them vibrated. Weapons rose from hidden compartments in the ground. Staffs, daggers, energy whips. Zyra immediately grabbed a long curved blade. Ethan hesitated, then picked up a shorter weapon. A knife, its edge glowing faintly. Vecros stepped forward, rolling his shoulders. Pathetic, he sneered. A weak human, hiding behind a Zokari commander. Ethan tightened his grip on the knife. The Elder raised a hand. Let the test begin. A deafening horn echoed through the arena. Vecros charged. The fight for survival. Ethan barely had time to react. Vecros moved with terrifying speed, swinging a massive blade toward Ethan's skull. He ducked at the last second, feeling the air shift as the weapon sliced past him. Zyra was already in motion, blocking Vecros' next attack with her curved blade. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal. Stay close, Zyra ordered. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had no choice. Vecros was a monster. Strong, fast, relentless. Every time Ethan tried to strike, the general deflected him like he was swatting away an insect. This wasn't a test. This was punishment. Vecros wasn't just trying to defeat them. He was trying to kill them. Ethan ducked another attack, rolling across the floor. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't a human battle. He couldn't fight like a human. He had to think. As Zyra engaged Vecros again, Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't as strong as the Zokari. He wasn't as fast, but he was smarter. Vecros lunged at Zyra, swinging his weapon in a brutal arc. She blocked, but the force sent her stumbling. Ethan saw his opening. Instead of attacking head-on, he dropped low, kicking Vecros' knee from the side. The general grunted as his balance shifted. It wasn't a powerful attack, but it was unexpected. Zyra recovered instantly, driving her blade toward Vecros' side. He barely blocked in time. Ethan grinned. That's it. He wasn't here to overpower Vecros. He was here to outmaneuver him. The fight continued, but now Ethan and Zyra moved together. She struck high, he struck low. She distracted, he exploited the weakness. They weren't just fighting separately anymore. They were fighting as one. The crowd grew louder, murmuring in surprise. Vecros growled in frustration. He had expected an easy victory. He had expected Ethan to fail. But Ethan wasn't failing. He was winning. With a final, calculated strike, Zyra disarmed Vecros, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. Ethan followed up immediately, pressing his blade against the general's throat. Silence fell over the arena. The elder stepped forward. "The bond is true," he declared. The crowd erupted in cheers and roars of approval. Ethan pulled back, his chest rising and falling. His entire body ached, but for the first time, he felt something strange. Victory. Zyra turned to him, her golden eyes unreadable. Then, in a rare moment of acknowledgement, she gave him a single nod. Ethan exhaled, his grip loosening on his weapon. For the first time since he had been captured, he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting back. But as he glanced at Vecros, who glared at him with murder in his eyes, Ethan knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. War on the horizon. Ethan Carter could still feel the heat of battle in his bones. His breath was steady now, but his muscles ached with exhaustion. The crowd in the arena had dispersed, but the energy in the air lingered, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and something else. Fear. The Zokari had expected him to fail. They had expected him to be weak, to be an embarrassment to their proud warrior traditions. Instead, he had stood alongside Zyra, matching her in combat, proving the bond between them. But not everyone was convinced. General Vecros stood at the far end of the arena, his golden eyes locked onto Ethan with pure hatred. His weapon had been taken from him. His challenge had failed. Yet he did not look like a defeated man. He looked like a man who had just begun plotting his revenge. Zyra stepped closer to Ethan, her voice low and controlled. "This is not over." Ethan scoffed. "Yeah, I figured." The doors to the arena slid open, and a group of high-ranking Zokari officials entered. Among them was the elder who had presided over the trial, his silver skin gleaming under the artificial lights. He raised his hand for silence, and all eyes turned to him. "The bond is proven," the elder declared. "Commander Zyra and Ethan Carter stand united before the Empire. The Council recognizes their right to lead." Murmurs spread through the room. Some nodded in approval. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Vecros, however, remained motionless, his fists clenched. Ethan leaned toward Zyra. "I don't think your buddy over there is taking the loss too well." Zyra's expression didn't change. "He will not accept this defeat. He never does." Ethan exhaled. "Great. So what happens now?" Zyra turned to face him fully, her golden eyes sharp. "Now, we prepare for war." The Council's warning. Ethan and Zyra were led to a grand chamber, the heart of the Zokari Council's power. The room was massive, with a domed ceiling displaying a holographic projection of the galaxy. Blue energy veins pulsed along the walls, giving the impression that the entire room was alive. Seated on raised platforms were members of the Zokari High Council, elders, strategists, and military leaders, all watching them with careful eyes. The head of the council, an elder named Veros, leaned forward. His voice was slow and deliberate. "Commander Zyra, your bond with this human has been confirmed, but many among us question its purpose." Zyra held her head high. "I have explained this before. If we do not change, our empire will not survive." Veros's gaze flicked to Ethan. "And this human, you believe he is the key?" Zyra nodded. "His people are strong. If we work together, we can rebuild. But not through war. Through unity." The room fell into a heavy silence. Then, a deep chuckle echoed from the side. Vecros. He stepped forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "Unity," he repeated mockingly. "You sound like a desperate dreamer, Commander. The Zokari do not beg for survival." He gestured toward Ethan. "And they certainly do not put their faith in weak creatures." Ethan clenched his fists, but he forced himself to stay silent. He had already beaten Vecros in the arena. He didn't need to take the bait now. Veros raised a hand for silence. "Enough," he said. His gaze returned to Zyra. "You speak of unity, but your rival speaks of strength, and the council is divided." Zyra narrowed her eyes. "You cannot be serious." Veros sighed. Vecros commands loyalty from many within our forces. There are those who would see his vision of war continue. And if he chooses to act against you, I fear he will not be alone. Ethan exhaled slowly. The message was clear. Vecros was planning something, and the council wasn't going to stop him. The ambush. Huzaira and Ethan were escorted back to their quarters, but the tension was thick in the air. Every Zokari soldier they passed looked at them differently now. Some with curiosity, others with open distrust. Ethan glanced at Tyra. They're not exactly throwing us a welcome party. Zaira didn't respond at first. Then, quietly, she said, "We are not safe here." Ethan frowned. "You mean from Vecros?" Zaira's jaw tightened. "From all of them." Before Ethan could press her further, the lights in the corridor flickered. Then, the ship lurched, sending them both stumbling. A deep alarm echoed through the halls. Zaira snapped into action, tapping a control panel on the wall. The display flickered, showing a chaotic battle scene. Ships firing, explosions lighting up the darkness of space. Ethan's stomach twisted. What the hell is happening? Zaira's eyes darkened. "We are under attack." Ethan frowned. "By who?" Zaira's expression was grim. "Our own people." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Vecros." Zaira nodded. "He is making his move." The ship rocked again as another explosion detonated nearby. The corridors filled with shouting voices, Zokari soldiers scrambling to defend the ship. Zaira turned to Ethan, her voice sharp. "We need to get to the command center. Now." Ethan didn't argue. They ran through the chaos, dodging debris and fallen soldiers. Around them, the ship groaned under the strain of the battle. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, the blue glow of the energy veins flickering. They turned a corner and came face to face with a squad of Zokari warriors, their weapons raised. Vecros' soldiers. One of them sneered. "Commander Zaira, your rule ends here." Ethan tensed, gripping the weapon at his side. Zaira's voice was cold as steel. "Then you should have brought more men." In a flash, the fight began. Zaira moved with deadly precision, her blade cutting through the enemy ranks. Ethan fought alongside her, dodging plasma shots, using his speed to outmaneuver the stronger warriors. He wasn't as skilled as her, but he was learning. And this time, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for her. They took down the last of the soldiers, breathing heavily. Ethan turned to Zaira. "If we don't stop this now, Vecros is going to take full control." Zaira nodded. "Then we take the fight to him." Ethan grinned despite himself. "Now you're speaking my language." They ran toward the command center, knowing that the final battle was coming. And this time, there would be no trials. No tests. Only war. The final stand. The war had begun. Ethan Carter sprinted down the dimly lit corridors of the Vexus, Zaira at his side. The ship shuddered violently as another explosion rippled through its core. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and emergency sirens howled through the halls like dying beasts. The ship was under siege. Not from humans. Not from an external enemy. From within. Vecros had made his move. Zaira's forces were struggling against his loyalists, warriors who still believed in endless war and conquest. The Zokari Empire was fracturing before their very eyes, and Ethan knew that if they didn't stop Vecros now, everything, Earth, the Zokari, and their fragile alliance, would be lost. Zaira's golden eyes flicked to Ethan. "We need to reach the command center." Ethan nodded, gripping the energy blade he had taken from a fallen soldier. "And what happens when we get there?" Zaira's voice was cold as steel. "We take control of the ship, and we end this." Ethan exhaled. "Good plan. Hope we live long enough to try it." They turned a corner, only to be met with a squad of Vecros' warriors blocking their path. There were 6 of them, all armed, all ready to kill. Their leader sneered at Zaira. "Your reign is over, Commander." Zaira didn't hesitate. "Prove it." The fight began in an instant. Zera moved like a shadow, her curved blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Ethan, still not as fast, relied on his instincts, dodging plasma fire, using the walls for cover, striking when the enemy least expected it. The corridor was narrow, and the battle was brutal. Ethan took a hit to the ribs, the energy pulse scorching through his armor. He gritted his teeth and stabbed upward, taking down his attacker. Zira dispatched the last soldier with a swift motion, her blade cutting through his armor like paper. Breathing hard, Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. I'm starting to think this whole marriage thing isn't as fun as people say. Zira sheathed her weapon. We are not married in the human sense. Ethan smirked. Good, because this is the worst honeymoon ever. Zira ignored him and stepped over the fallen soldiers. Come, we are running out of time. The throne of the Vexus. The command center of the Vexus was the heart of the ship, a massive circular chamber lined with glowing control panels and towering observation windows. From here, one could see the chaos unfolding outside. Zokari ships locked in vicious battle, weapons firing in all directions. At the center of the room stood General Vekros. He was waiting for them. Surrounded by his elite warriors, Vekros stood near the central control panel, his golden eyes gleaming with triumph. His thick armor was dented, but he was still standing tall, radiating power. You took longer than I expected, he mused. Did you enjoy your last moments of freedom? Zara stepped forward, her shoulders squared. This ends now. Vekros smirked. Oh, I agree. But I will be the one who ends it. He gestured to the massive display behind him. Ethan's stomach clenched as he saw what it showed. The Vexus main weapons were locked onto Earth. You should have accepted defeat, Tyra, Vekros continued. But instead, you chose to bond with a human. You betrayed your own kind. And now, I will cleanse that mistake. Ethan's heart pounded. You lunatic. If you fire that weapon, you'll start an all-out war with Earth. Vekros' grin widened. Exactly. Ethan cursed under his breath. Vekros didn't care about survival. He didn't care about the Zokari's future. He wanted destruction. War. To burn everything down rather than admit that his empire was falling apart. Zyra's expression didn't change. You are a fool, Vekros, she said. You are too blind to see that we are already dying. Killing the humans will not save us. Vekros stepped forward, unsheathing a massive energy blade. Spoken like a weakling, spoken like someone unworthy of command. His golden eyes flicked to Ethan. Tell me, human, he sneered. Do you really think she bonded with you because she values you? Because she cares for your kind? Ethan didn't flinch. I think she did what she had to do to stop monsters like you. Vekros let out a deep chuckle. Then let's see if you're worthy of standing beside her. He lunged. The final battle. The fight was a blur of motion. Vekros was strong, stronger than any Zokari Ethan had faced. His attacks were relentless, each strike meant to kill. Ethan dodged, barely keeping up, his energy blade clashing against the general's brutal swings. Zyra engaged the other warriors, cutting through them with unmatched precision. But she was outnumbered. If Ethan didn't end this quickly, they would both be overwhelmed. He had to think. Vekros was bigger, stronger, but Ethan was faster. He waited for the right moment, the right mistake. Vekros raised his blade high for a final, crushing blow. And that was when Ethan moved. He dropped low, sliding beneath the strike, twisting his body. With every ounce of strength he had, he drove his blade upward, straight into Vekros' exposed side. The general let out a roar of pain. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ripped the blade free and kicked Vekros backward. The massive warrior stumbled, blood spilling from the wound. Zyra dispatched the last of Vekros' men and turned just in time to see Ethan standing over the fallen general. Vekros coughed, his body shaking. You think you've won? Ethan glared down at him. No, but you lost. Vecros let out a final, shuddering breath. Then he was still. Silence filled the command center. Ethan exhaled, stepping back. His hands trembled slightly, but he steadied himself. It was over. Zyra walked to the control panel, shutting down the ship's weapons. The threat to Earth was gone. The battle outside was ending. She turned to Ethan. "You fought well," she said. Ethan smirked. "Not bad for a human, huh?" Zyra didn't answer, but something in her gaze had changed. Respect. Understanding. Something more. A new beginning. The war was over. With Vecros dead and the rebellion crushed, the Zokari Council had no choice but to acknowledge Zyra's rule. She had proven herself, not just through combat, but through change. Ethan stood beside her as she addressed the Zokari people. "The path of conquest is over," Zyra declared. "We can no longer survive through war. We must look forward, to alliances, to rebuilding, to a future where we do not fight for survival, but for prosperity." The crowd listened, some with hope, some with doubt, but the change had begun. Ethan crossed his arms. "So what now?" Zyra looked at him, her golden eyes calm. "Now we build something new." Ethan chuckled. "And what does that make me?" Zyra tilted her head. "That, Ethan Carter, is up to you." He looked out into the stars, a slow grin forming. Whatever came next, one thing was certain. This was only the beginning.